If you remember from chapter 17 of last week, we talked about Micah and Micah's violations, and then eventually found himself, the violation of him acting like he was a Levite, having an ephod, having all the things, and trying to be a pseudo-high priest or do whatever it was that he should have been doing that he was doing. He then, of course, eventually found this Levite that came, and Micah gave him both a place to live and a place to work. The Levite, of course, accepts this position at the end of chapter 17 that we saw last week. And promised him wages, promised him clothing, promised him food, and became essentially a part of Micah's family, right? And we saw at the end of chapter 17 as well. Micah was doing these religious acts. He was trying to get this Levite in. He actually says, now I know that the Lord is doing good, seeing I have a Levite to be my priest. So he's trying to do all these things to win favor with God, so that he could benefit from the subsequent blessings that would follow as well. Okay, now everything Micah had done was wrong, right? It was all in violation of all the laws, all the legal systems of the Old Testament Jewish law. He was serving himself rather than serving God. And because of it, there was a great number, many of violations that took place. If I just jump back one, maybe to that soup picture. Yeah, this is his religious stew that he had kind of came up with to try to take syncretism, all these different things together, and make his own religious stew with Judaism, paganism, idolatry, and ephod, a fake priest, seasoned it with greed, seasoned it with superstition, and was trying to feast on this and become whatever it was he was trying to become, right? Trying to find favor with God, get the blessings from God, and doing all these things that he shouldn't have done, okay? That was Micah's violations in chapter 17. Now, as we jump into chapter 18, what we see is that the story of Micah and his priest actually gets worse. Okay, it's as bad enough as it was in chapter 18, as we will see. Things actually get quite a bit worse. The tribe of Dan starts to look for an inheritance to settle, okay? And if you look at verse number 1 there of chapter 18, we see specifically here kind of the account of what's going on. And in those days, of course, no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribe of Israel. Okay, now the first introduction of Judges, if you remember way back now, it's been several weeks ago that we started this. It recounted the account that the Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country and then prevented them coming down into the plains. Okay, we won't flip over there, but in verse 34 specifically of chapter 1, it gives us this account of the Amorites kind of keeping them up into the hills. They were afraid of the Amorites. They didn't ask God to help them defeat the Amorites. They were just kind of running and hiding, and they were not able to come down into the plains and gather the harvest. Obviously, better to live down in the valleys than it is up in the rough and tumble mountains. So that's, even if now, that was the initial part of this. Now, at the end of the book of Judges, we still see the Danites still not having this inheritance, still not having this place to stay. And reality, what had taken place with the Danites, of course, simply had failed to kick the Amorites out, right? God had told them to do so, and they did not. And because of that, they were still had no inheritance, had no place to kind of stay. Now, this land that they were supposed to kick the Amorites out lay to the west of Judah's inheritance and included the flat land along the Mediterranean Sea. The Danite land that was supposed to be theirs was good land, very fertile, a good place to stay, but they did not want to fight for it. They are showing the same reluctance and had shown the same reluctance to fight during, if you remember, the time of Deborah and Barak's battle with the Canaanites. Dan was the one tribe, remember in chapter 5, 17 or 18, maybe 19, I don't remember the exact verse. But they're like the one tribe that didn't want to do anything, right? They didn't want to get involved in any way. They didn't want to put themselves out in any way. They didn't participate in the battle at all. Okay? So that's kind of where this is at. Verse number 2, chapter 18. And the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coats, men of valor, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, Go, search the land. Who, when they came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, they lodged there. Okay, so we see now at this point in the book of Judges, finally the Danites dispatch here 5 scouts to go and to scout for some land where they could settle, like without kind of causing any problems. Okay, Danites are Switzerland, pretty much, right? They don't really want to do anything, don't want to cause, well, probably more like France. That's probably don't want them to cause anything, don't want to have any problems, but still want to try to find a way to make sure that they're okay. Okay, so we see the Danites going to go find some land to stay, but don't want to ruffle any feathers, aren't going to go in and try to conquer anything, just hopefully find a place that they can settle. And they send 5 men out of their own, men of valor, of course we see there, to do that. And when the scouting party reaches this area where Micah is, as you see in verse 2, they lodged with him before moving on. Right, verse number 2, at the very end of it. And they came to the Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah. There they lodged. Okay. Now, we know Micah, not a great person. Now, the Danites, questionable decisions have been made on their part as well. And now we have these 2 groups or 2 individual sources here lodging together and kind of hanging out for an evening or however long the case may have been. Now, while they are there, we'll see in verses 3 through 5 here in just a second, they recognize Micah's priest's accent. Okay, and they asked him how he came to be in Micah's house. All right, and then what ensues from there ensues. Go to verse number 3. And when they were there by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. And they turned in thither and said unto him, What brought thee hither? And what makest thou in this place? And what hast thou here? And he said unto them, Thus and thus dealeth Micah with me, and hath hired me, and I am his priest. And they said unto him, Ask counsel, we pray thee, of God, that we may know whether our way which we shall go and be prosperous. Okay, so they're there, they recognize the accent of this young Levite, and they ask him, how in the world did you end up here in Micah's house? Right? They had a series of questions there. And the Levite explains to them what had happened. Right? Explains to them that Micah brought him in, hired him to be the priest, treated him like family, giving him a place to stay, giving him food, giving him clothes, giving him wage, explaining everything that has taken place. We should expect the Danites here, the 5 Danites, to protest the presence of this Levite in the house of Micah. Okay, because this was in direct violation of some of the most basic laws of God, right? The Danites should have recognized that this isn't right, this isn't good, and they should have protested against this thing taking place. But we see the Danites, though, instead of questioning or telling Micah and this Levite that it's not right, they actually ask the Levite to go to God and find out what they're doing of trying to find land that's not being occupied or not going to cause any problems, not the land that God told them to go take. if this was going to end up being a prosperous expedition for them. Okay? So, if you just begin to slowly pull out the things that are wrong about this little narrative, there's a ton of stuff, right, that is in direct violation of what God has told them to do. The Danites should have taken the land that God told them to take and kicked the Amorites out. The Danites should never have been worming around and trying to find land somewhere else that wasn't what God had promised them. Micah should have never brought the Levite in. The Levite should have never agreed to do this. The Danites should have realized the Levite shouldn't have done this. The Levite shouldn't have been acting on the authority of God. The Danites should have asked the Levite to ask the authority of God. So we can see there's a whole bunch of violations here taking place, and on some of the very just basic laws of God. And we don't really get into some of the more kind of complicated things that take place a lot of times in the book of the law. This is just basic stuff, that they are directly doing what they should not be doing. Okay? And which of these things is more unbelievable? Especially if you go in verse number 6. And the priest said unto them, Go in peace, before the Lord is your way, wherein ye go. That is his response here. Okay? Which is more unbelievable? The fact that the priest is pretending to speak on the behalf of God, or that the Danites actually believed that was the case? Which one of those things is more unbelievable? Probably equally both kind of crazy, right? That this Levite thought that he had the authority to do this, and then that the Danites thought that he was. The whole thing's kind of crazy. It shows both are completely out of touch with the reality of God. Okay, that's what it shows, right? It shows just the total out of touchness with reality. Of course, God would not, and will not speak through the Levite who is in direct violation of his law. God would never do that. Okay? He can't. It wouldn't be God. Religion had become for Micah it had become for him just a tool to use to get what he wanted, right? Utilitarian for him, if that's a word. All right, that's what this had become for him. It's just become a means for him to get what he wanted, right? The priest, the Danites, Micah himself, none of these people had a true relationship with God. They're each trying to get what they want in their own way, but use God as the avenue to get it. Prosperity gospel, New Apostolic Reformation Church with prophecies, old school Pentecostals in the 60s. We could just go on and on and on and on and on. All these different things, the Catholic Church, portions of the Protestant Reformation. We could go on and on and on. All the different things that have taken place since the beginning of religion and God, that man has tried to use God like a genie, right? Use him as the fairy godmother. This is what I want. This is how I want to get it, but I don't want it to be any type of way intrusive to my character or what I want to do. Okay? I expect this to happen. I expect God to do these things. When he doesn't, it's because God doesn't love me. Or God doesn't whatever. God doesn't care about us. Or God's not what he says he is. Or it's always God's fault. You can go all through history. Every religious explosion of things that have been false, that have not been the true gospel, the true nature of God. You can look at all of them, and you can see at every instance when things begin to break down within the religion, it's always God's fault. It's always because of this, or always because of that. It's never the people who are trying to use God in a way that God does not desire and cannot be used. Just take the prosperity gospel, right? When you don't get what you say, it's because maybe you've not been faithful enough, or God's not being faithful to you, or you're not praying enough, or you're not giving enough, or it's never our fault when things don't work out the way we think God should make them work out. It's the same thing going on here in the Old Testament, right? And as I was studying this week and been going through this, it was incredibly frustrating to me. Just the exact same thing happening in Christian churches today. The same things that we see Micah blaming God for, the same things that we see this Levite trying to do, the same things that we see this Danite trying to do, is the same stinking things that Christians are doing today. And it's doing nothing but breaking down to the regular world who God is. And it's incredibly frustrating that churches are a lot of the reasons behind God having not the same pristine that He should have in the eyes of people. We have a decline in morality around the world. We have a decline in morality in the United States. It's because people, Christians and churches, have allowed God to become whatever else people want and not stay true to the nature of who God is. And then unsaved people are pushing more and more and more away, and we have allowed it to happen. Right? The church, the Christians, us, we have allowed it to happen because we've not stood up and said, no, this is wrong. We've just continued to take and continue to just, in our own mind, it's not real. I know we know it's not right. We can't say anything about it. We don't want to upset anybody. I just continue to allow bad things to go on and on and on, and I don't change my stance on things or say anything out loud or try to counter it in any way, and that's why we're in this position, right? The Israelites, over and over and over again, the whole story of the book of Judges, the whole story of the book of Judges is that they continue to do okay for a while, and then they go right back into the trash that brings them the problems, and then they expect God to come in and take care of them. And of course, God is faithful because that's who God is. If He wasn't faithful, He wouldn't be God. And He makes them go through trials, and He makes them go through problems, and He makes them go through punishments and consequences, because we've got to be consequences for the sin. Then He brings them right back into the fold. And then they do the exact same thing and think over and over and over again, right? Imagine how... people in Moxie are getting to the age where they like to go do things, right? And not all the time do they want to listen to what mom and dad have to do, especially when they're like playing, right? And they get horse playing more and more. And Haley and I, we're like not like super protective parents. We let them play, like we let them kind of fight and get into things. But it usually comes to a point where, all right, girls, hey, if you keep doing this, you're going to get hurt, right? And then what happened? They keep doing it, right? So I say a little more, hey girls, I'm telling you, if you keep doing this and keep playing this rough or keep jumping off the coffee table and doing spins in the air, you're eventually going to get hurt. Okay, Dad. Well, then this continues to happen. And then I get to a point where I say, girls, if you do this and you get hurt, don't come whining to me because I'm not listening to it, right? I've told you 3 times now, over and over and over again, if you do this and I don't want to hear the tears, don't come to Daddy, don't come whining to me and Mommy because we've tried to tell you this. And I get a little bit frustrated. Can you imagine how frustrated God had to be with the Israelites? Even just during this period of the book of Judges, He had to be incredibly frustrating, right? Because He just kept telling them, and they just kept doing it. Imagine how frustrated God is with Christians today. It's got to be the exact same exasperation. Because He's trying to get us. He's trying to tell churches, don't do this. You are the light. You are the way the gospel spreads. People's lives are changed because you serve me. You are the outreach of me on the world. That is the job of churches. And then we're not doing it. And we're allowing all the other trash to come in. And it's continuing to taint God's name farther and farther and farther. And then you get some people like the Danites who come in who need a little bit of God, right? They're trying to at least figure out something. And we give them some convoluted version of it. And they think, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, then it doesn't work out. And who do they blame? Not us, God. It's incredibly important for us as Christians to make sure, we're going to see a civil war going to take place here in chapter 19 if we get to it, but it's incredibly important for us as Christians to take great care with the responsibilities that God has entrusted us with. Spreading the gospel, making sure we're living faithful lives, and being God's ultimate testimony to the unsaved. Right? That is the job. That's what's required of us. That's how we spread the gospel in our lives. That's how we spread the gospel as a church. When we don't take great care with that responsibility, who catches the blame? Not us, God. Right? And then the world gets turned off because of it. We see that happening here. It's the same thing happening in churches today. Okay? Didn't mean to go on a huge tangent. I apologize, but I've been frustrated this week because of it. Right? It's been incredibly frustrating to see this because it's gone on and on and on for generation now. Right? For generations over generations, the same problem has happened. it's our job to at least begin to fix it. Now, are we going to ultimately be able to fix the entire problem? No. That's not going to change till Christ comes back. We know that, right? But it's our job to at least try, right? At least make sure we're giving our best effort in any way that we can. Micah here, religion had become simply just a tool. So after receiving this assurance from the Levites that the Lord would prosper their trip, that their search for land would be made prosperous because he's a Levite, and he told them that they would. We jump down to verse number 7, and we see the Danites making their way to a place called Laish. Okay, verse 7. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless, after the manner of the Zidonians, quiet and secure. And there's no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame in anything. And they were far from the Zidonians, and had no business with any man. And they came unto their brethren to Zorah and to Ashtal. And their brethren said unto them, What say ye? And they said, Arise, that we may go up against them. For we've seen the land, and behold, it's very good. And are ye still? Be not slothful to go, entering to possess the land. When ye go, ye shall come into a people secure, into a large land, for God hath given it unto your hands, a place where there is no want of anything that is in the earth. So the people of Laish were on the other side of the mountains of Lebanon, okay? Far away from the maritime Sidonians, and therefore no rule, right? Nobody was oppressing, no oppressive rule over them, as we saw there in verse number 7. So the Danites here see an opportunity, right? The Danites could come in, they could attack them, take the good land that they have without any fear of really probably any retaliation of a stronger army at all. Pretty easy to go in and take this over. So the spies see this. They come up with this plan. They come back to their brethren with this obviously very opportunistic report. And if you're somebody who sent people out and they come back and tell, hey, this land looks good. There's nothing there that we're going to need to want for. All of our needs will be taken care of here in this land. The people that are there, not very tough. It's going to be easy to go in and take them over. If I'm a Danite and I'm back and they come back and tell me this, I'm thinking, well, let's go, right? And then I've had a high priest tell me that God's going to give it to me anyways. Okay? So if I'm just a regular old Danite waiting for these old boys to come back, I'm thinking, hey, this sounds pretty good. All right? This sounds like something that we should definitely be doing. Verse number 11. And there went from thence of the family of Danites out of Zorah and out of Eshtaol 600 men appointed with weapons of war, and they went up and pitched in Kirjath-jearim in Judah, wherefore they called the place Meneh-Dan unto this day. Behold, it is behind Kirjath-jearim. And they passed thence unto Mount Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Okay, so we see 600 Danite men armed with weapons of war left Zorah and Ashtaol to capture this land, and they encamped, as we saw in verse 12 there, in Kiriath-jearim in Judah, and then eventually they moved into the hill country of Ephraim. And while they were there, the spies told the Danite soldiers that Micah's house is there. Verse number 14. Then answered the 5 men that went to spy out of the country of Laish, and said unto the brethren, Do ye know that there is in these houses an ephod and a teraphim, and a graven image and a molten image? Now therefore consider what ye have to do. So the the Danites that were the spies who had stayed in the house of Micah, and I'm sure Micah brought them in and showed them the great and wonderful things that he had in his house, showed them the ephod, showed them teraphim, showed them a graven image, showed them all the expensive things essentially that he had in the house. And the 5 Danite spies said, hey, did you know in this house is all these things? Okay? Verse 15. And they turned thitherward, and came to the house of the young man the Levite, even unto the house of Micah, and saluted him. And the 600 men appointed with their weapons of war, which were of the children of Dan, stood by the entering of the gate. And the 5 men that went spy out the land went up and came in thither, and took the graven image and ephod and teraphim and molten image. And the priest stood in the entering of the gate with 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. And these went into Micah's house and fetched the carved image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. Then said the priest unto them, What do ye? And they said unto him, Hold thy peace, lay thine hand upon thy mouth, and go with us, and be to us father and a priest. It is better for thee to be a priest into the house of one man, or that thou be a priest into a tribe, and family, and Israel. Okay, so 5 spies then we see tells them about these images, the ephod, all the stuff that is there. And the 600 men decide they want what? They want the stuff, right? They want that stuff that's in Micah's house. They make the decision. That's what they want to do. We actually see, the Bible says they turned thitherward, right? It's like I imagine all 600 of them like turning and like looking at the house. Like, yeah, we want the stuff, okay? So they decided that they want to do that. So they head and greet the Levites at the city gate. Okay, we see them saluting him there, as we saw in verse number 16. The 5 spies, while that meeting is going on, break into Micah's house and steal the priestly items. Teraphim, the ephod, the molten, they steal all this stuff. And when the priest asked what the spies were doing, so Micah apparently either doesn't know what's going on, isn't there. Maybe he's amidst of this meeting that's going on. We don't know where Micah's at right now, but what we do realize is that the priest, he figures out something's up, right? He realizes that something is going on and sees that they're taking these things, and he stops them and asks them what exactly the spies are doing. And they tell him, put your hand over your mouth, and you see nothing, you hear nothing, you say nothing, essentially, right? Tell him to be quiet. And then after telling him to be quiet, they do what to the priest? Give him an offer that he can't refuse, right? That they offer him an opportunity to be their priest of the whole tribe of Danites instead of just the priest to one family. Okay? And if the Danites were calloused, the priest was a disloyal opportunist, and as we see in verse number 20, and the priest's heart was glad. And he took the ephod and teraphim and the graven image and went in the midst of the people. So Levi said, hey, I'm with you guys now, right? This is a better opportunity. I'm going to come with you all. So we see exactly him happily taking the things and joining the group as they went on their way. What would you say, lay at the heart of the priest's decision to leave Micah's house? What do you think lay at the heart of the priest's decision to leave Micah's house?
More prestige.
What?
More prestige.
Exactly, right? Notoriety, right? Security, obviously, but notoriety. It's a bigger stage, it's a bigger platform. More people will know him as the high priest. He will come in, and he's going to be able to be in charge of all the Danites' religious activities, and all these tribes are going to look at him, and he's much more prestige, a whole lot more notoriety. Verse 21. So they turned and departed and put the little ones in the cattle and carriages before them. They went, and when they were a good way away from the house of Micah, the men that were in houses near to Micah's house were gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they cried unto the children of Dan. They turned their faces and said unto Micah, What aileth thee, that thou comest with such a company? And he said, Ye have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priests, and ye are gone away. And what have I more? And what is this that ye say unto me, What aileth thee? And the children of Dan said unto them, Let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. And the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw they were too strong for him, he turned and went back into his own house. So Micah here comes back, or whatever, and he comes back home, essentially, and realizes what has taken place, right? And his anger boils at the thought here of the Danites carrying away, and we see it specifically, he refers to it in verse 24. They are carrying away his what? his gods, right? That's how he refers to this, right? Let's look at it again. I think it's really important here. And he said, ye have taken away my gods, which I made. There's a great tale there on the state of Micah's spiritual decay. Right? He's boiling over with anger because his gods that he made are gone. I think the writer of Judges phrased this way there specifically. For when you read this, you realize, yeah, there's a lot of problems here, right? Micah is he's spiritually really messed up. So he and a company of his neighbors, in verse 22, as we saw, the other houses of Micah, they come and they eventually catch up with the Danites. And as we saw in verses 23 through 26, I won't read through them again, but he realizes pretty quickly, tells them why he's upset, but realizes pretty quickly that he really can't do anything about it. Right? The Danites greatly outnumber him, therefore he decides to go back home. Okay? Micah now in his mind, has lost everything. If you will, just flip back over to chapter 17 quickly with me and look at verses 12 and 13. Just because it's just a page over, or maybe 2 pages over. And Micah consecrated the Levite, this young man became his priest in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know the Lord do me good, seeing that I have a Levite to my priest. How do you think Micah's view of God changed once he lost everything that he thought would bring him God's blessing? What do you think Micah's mindset now is? He just lost everything that he thought was going to bring him God's blessing. What do you think he's thinking? From his perspective, it looked like what? He lost everything in what? God had abandoned him. From his perspective, it's exactly what it looks like. He's lost everything, and God had abandoned him. And now you see why I've been so frustrated this week studying this, right? Because it had nothing to do with God. This has nothing to do with what has taken place in the lives of Danites and the lives of Micah and this Levite. Of course, we know God's obviously all sovereign. I'm not saying that. But the despair and disdain and now bad taste in his mouth that he has for religion and God. And he does, obviously. He thinks everything is gone. He's blaming it because he thinks God has taken it. It has nothing to do with God, but everything to do with his Levite that said, yeah, I can help you. And the Danites who said, yeah, we need to take this. And Micah who thought, well, this is how I need to do things. Let's keep going. Verse 27. Hey, chapter 18. Let me get this chapter finished up. Going to 19. Does that didn't look right? Verse 27. Sorry. And they took the things that Micah had made, and the priests which he had came to Laish, and to a people that were quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man. And it was in the valley that lieth Beth Rehob. They built a city and dwelt therein. They called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the children of Dan set up the graven image. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were the priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And they set them up Micah's graven image, which he had made all that time that the house of God was in Shiloh. There's some stuff that happens here, right? So, we got 5 minutes. The Danites continue their journey to Laish. They conquer and destroy the city, because obviously there's nobody there to help them. They rebuild the city and name it Dan, okay? And in their city, they set up this graven image and appoint their own priest from the tribe of Manasseh, which we saw there in verses 28 through 30. They totally ignore the fact that the tabernacle was at Shiloh, and that it was the only God-authorized place to worship. Okay? Idolatry here is flourishing when every man does what is right in his own eyes. The mention of Shiloh there in verse 31 was another reminder of the need for the Shiloh, or the Messiah, to come and rule as king over Israel. Shiloh is the name, of course, for Jesus, Israel's only true hope. Shiloh is the glimmer of hope purposely inserted here at the end of chapter 18, at the first of the appendixes here of the book of Judges. The first mention of this that we see. So, now the Danites are there. They set up their own tabernacle. They've got all these graven images, all these things that are taking place. They set their own high priest up. Let's just quickly recap real fast. Which of the 10 Commandments, the book of the law of God, are the Danites and the priest of Micah violating by their thoughts and their actions that have taken place in the last 10 verses? Wrote down, because I know it's kind of hard to correlate all this stuff, 1, 2, 6, 8, 10, possibly 3 and 4. That they have in direct violation, right? Now, we know the Levitical law, there's a lot of parts to that, right? But the law that God gave Moses that's supposed to govern the Israelites are, of course, the 10 Commandments. And they're very straightforward, right? Very straightforward. First 5 are man and God, last 5 are man and man. Very straightforward examples or rules that they are to live by. 1, 2, 6, 8, 10, and possibly 3 and 4. That's what they're in direct violation of here. As they are doing what has taken place, right? But even with all of these things on, we see again the mention of verse number 31. They set up Micah's graven image, which made all of them, which he made all the time that the house of God, the actual tabernacle, was in Shiloh. And we see now our first reference here of Shiloh being kind of the overarching glimmer of hope for the Israelites that eventually Christ comes as the Messiah. Now, we are going to stop right there. Go ahead, Chad. Hit it one time for me. Yeah, go again. Give me to my... All right, so next week we're going to finish up this lesson with this civil war that takes place. All right, obviously you can see there's a lot of tension that has been kind of slowly building as we've moved through these couple of chapters. There are covenantal violations, poor relationship with God, poor treatment with each other, and worse problems to come, which we're going to see in chapters 19 and 20. Just real quick with me. Go to verse chapter 19. Because this is a really good ending point / starting point for next week. Look at verse number 1. This is kind of the background of the Civil War. And it came to pass in those days, no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of the mountain of Ephraim. And what's the next phrase say? Who took him should Levites have concubines? Now we see why there's going to be some civil war. Okay, this is a really good ending point / starting point for next week. Took a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah, and she, of course, concubine, played the whore against him. And then this is where the cracks begin to happen. And then there is a civil war that we'll look into next week. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you again for this lesson, for the opportunity that we have to be able to look into the book of Judges and see very real-world, current-day, present things taking place in our society that you have been dealing with your people for hundreds of years, Lord, and how exasperating that must be for you. But we're thankful of your faithfulness to your people, and a reminder to us to be faithful to you. Hold the line, fight the fight, stand for the cause, never back down. It's a requirement, it's the job, it's the duty of us, Lord, and I pray we never waver in our job to do so. Pray for Pastor Rob as he comes in the next few minutes as well, that you'll just use him. Lord, this morning keep us attentive to the lesson and truth you've had for us through him this morning as well. In your name I pray. Amen.